Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of Todd's Pod. In today's episode, things get a little bit heavy. I get to talking about my life and things that I believed about God growing up, and how some things have changed since I've grown up, and kind of make maybe a surprising announcement. But thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to Todd's Pod. Hey everybody, welcome to the show. I am your host, Todd Napper, and as I said in my intro, today is episode number 6. Thank you so much for stopping by to listen. I really do appreciate your support. I really do appreciate everything that my friends do for me and people who are around me and my fans, my not-so-fans. But I guess I could call y'all fans. I don't know. Anyway, probably more likely just friends and family. But thank y'all so much for stopping by. And on today's episode, I am going to do a deep dive on me. And y'all get to play the part of my therapist. And no, I'm not going to pay you for this. If you're listening to this is something that you're just listening to on your own. I'm sorry. This is cheaper than therapy. It's free for me. So, anyway, I don't know if anybody's actually going to listen to this whole thing or not, but if you do, thank you so much for listening. So I want to preface this podcast by saying this is how I viewed things growing up. Now, this may not be how other people think. This may not be how other people thought when I was growing up, but this is just how I viewed things and my perception of things growing up in church and growing up in the faith that I grew up in and growing up into the religious sect that I grew up in. As I said, this is how I think. This is how I viewed things. I'm not slamming them by any means. I am not putting anybody down. I am not saying that they're wrong. I'm not saying any of this stuff. This is just going to be coming from my perspective and my views only, okay? I want to preface that because I know that if people do listen to this, it may blow up and be one of the biggest viral things that goes around. I don't know. And then again, it may just sit there and not do anything. I don't know. But this is how I view things. This is how my life, and how I grew up, okay? So, if you have any comments on that, feel free to comment on it. Feel free to comment on what I'm about to talk about. All of that kind of stuff. But I will let you, like I said, this is me, all right? I've really been struggling on whether or not I should even post this podcast or not, which probably is a big indicator that that I shouldn't. But I need to get some things off my chest. I need to get some things out in the open, and I need to get some thoughts and out of my mind. I mean, because as I've said in a few videos and podcasts, I'm tired of being alone. I'm tired of feeling like I'm alone. I've been in a struggle for years trying to find my identity and trying to figure out who I am and what it is that I do and why do I do what I do and why do I think the way that I think and all of these why do I struggle with the things that I struggle with? Why do I fight with thoughts of trying to figure out, of God and religion and churches, and why is it that I struggle with all of these things so much? So, I'm going to go through this process and I'm going to go through this my life basically, and kind of talk about it a little bit and kind of explain why I am where I am. Yeah, I think that's right. That's enough introduction. I mean, my introduction's been 5-10 minutes long, just talking about what I'm supposed to be talking about. But anyway, going back to being a kid, I grew up in a church. We were apostolic, and now I know that whenever I was growing up and I told somebody I was an apostolic, people would look at me and go, "An apo what?" And then my quickest response back to that would be, "Well, okay, to put it in a phrase in a term that you might understand a little more, we're super conservative Pentecostal." And people would be like, "Oh, okay," and then but that still wouldn't completely get them to understand what I was. And my views growing up as a child, I grew up in a church where we had service four times a week. It was 3 days. 3 days out of the week we were in church. 4 times out of the week, it was Sunday morning, Sunday night, Tuesday night, Friday night. That's just how things were. I grew up in a church where my papa, my grandfather, was the pastor, and so I kind of grew up as a. I wasn't a preacher's kid because my mom wasn't a preacher, but I grew up in an environment that was very much around preachers and pastors. My grandfather was a pastor. Both my uncles were preachers, and my papa ended up turning his church over to one of my uncles. So my uncle was the pastor there for quite some time as well. So I grew up in an environment of preachers, and I remember at a very young age wanting to be a preacher myself. Um, I can think back when I was younger, very young. Um, my mom recorded me preaching at I don't know, I was probably 3, 4, 5 years old, and made this little made a little recording of me preaching. And so I remember at a young age being doing wanting to be wanting to be a preacher, and feeling that call to ministry. Um my life took a lot of different twists and turns through that time. Um it goes I know my thoughts are kind of all over the place. So hopefully I can bring it all down and bring it and make sense of my story and make sense of my life. Um so I remember at a young age trying to do everything right. Um like I said, this is my perspective. This is how I thought of things. This has no bearing on what other people have thought and what other people have believed. I'm not going to be blaming anyone because all in all, what happens in our life is a reaction it is our reaction to things. It's our response to things. So anything that happened in my life, it was my response to whatever. So I grew up believing in being very conservative and trying to do things the right way. And I pretty much just took the word. I never did really grab onto anything on my own. I listened to people that I trusted, and I listened to people that were teaching, and so I took it for face value. I took it as, okay, well, I mean, if that's what they say needs to happen, then that's what I need to do. Um, I grew up I grew up in a religion that was rather strict. Just trying to think of how deep I should actually go into all of this. Um, Once again, my perspective, if you believe differently, that's up to you. And I'm not bashing you, I'm not putting you down, anything like that, but this is just how I viewed it, okay? Um, I saw a religion with long sleeves on men, men weren't allowed to wear short sleeves. They weren't allowed to wear shorts. They weren't allowed to have facial hair. Women were in skirts, long hair, no cut hair, no jewelry, no television. I grew up without a TV. I was probably in my 20s before I ever actually had a TV in my house. Yeah. 18, actually 19, because I moved out for a little while and got a TV then. So the first time I ever actually had a TV in my house was when I was 19 years old, and moved out on my own. So I grew up in a religion that was very strict on standards. They had a lot of things that they felt like, to be a true Christian, to be a true follower of Jesus, you needed to adhere to these guidelines to be saved and to be truly set apart from the rest of the world. And as I said, I'm not going to fault them for that. If that's what they truly believe, then God bless them. I don't necessarily agree with that now, but hey, I mean, I'm not going to fault them for it, because everybody's got to do what they've got to do to make them feel, if that's what they feel like, if that's what they believe will get them to heaven, then that's what they need to do. I'm not going to say I'm not going to say they can't do that. But anyway, I grew up very sheltered. I grew up not knowing a whole lot of things about the way the world works. I kind of had a rude awakening whenever I turned old enough to go out on my own. I grew up believing in a God. This is me, okay? I believed in a God who was very quick to punish. I believed in a God who, if you didn't do the right thing, if you did the slightest thing wrong, he was going to punish you, and he was going to make bad things happen to you. That was my perception of God, and that was my perception of someone that, I remember being in services where I was terrified that I was going to get called out for something that was that was minor. I mean, it wasn't even anything serious, but yet I was terrified, and I couldn't worship. I couldn't lift up. I couldn't praise God. I couldn't pray or anything because I was terrified of God. I was terrified. I grew up terrified of God. I grew up so scared of God that God was just out to get me. And I remember praying and just begging God to, oh God, please, just crying and pleading with God to forgive me for the smallest and slightest things. Which, I mean, having a tender heart toward God and wanting to live right and do right is good. But at the same time, I didn't know a God that loved me. And that's one of the things that I struggle with still today is not knowing a God that truly loves me and that has mercy and that has grace. And I believed, I don't know what, I don't know why it was so hard for me to believe in a God that loved me and that cared for me. And it's because I had people around me who loved me. My parents loved me, and my parents, treated me right and, raised me right and did the best they could. And my dad loved me, and, he did the best he could to show that he loved me. And my grandparents showed that they loved me. And so I don't know why there was such a disconnect between knowing a God who truly loved me and my perception of God as being a dictator and someone with a hammer that was ready to just crack down on me and, send me to hell. And, that made me believe that if I did one little thing wrong, that I was going to go to hell, It got so bad and it got so hard that belief became so strong that when I decided that I didn't want to live that way anymore, that I wanted to kind of do some things on my own, and started watching TV and started watching videos and going to the movies, and I felt backslidden, and I felt like I was far away from God and all this kind of stuff. And I probably was far away from God at that time. But to be honest, I wasn't ever really doing anything wrong. I wasn't one of those people who went out and drank all the time and partied and lived a drunk life and, went out sinning and things like that. But